Hi, Susan. Hi, Alice Murray. Hi, Renee.
Where's Cynthia?
Welcome aboard. Yeah, where's Cindy? Where's Cindy? In Virginia. Welcome, everyone.
Thank you.
The sad news and the good news is this is our last class for this series of classes. I'll keep teaching as long as I'm ambulatory.
That's good.
So, and I'm thinking the next class that will start up in January will be a beginning astrology course, so that we have that online for students at a distance, and then we've got Michelle who's asked for one locally. So we'll get the alphabet basically out of the way, and that way we'll have that preserved. So our next event coming up is this Sunday at 11 a.m. local time. We will have our service acknowledging the sun's movement into the sign of Scorpio. We do a religious service here every third Sunday of the month, and that is also broadcast over the internet. And they're usually fun and insightful and inspiring activities. I hope everyone has been doing their homework, because what's that? I'm okay. I'm okay.
Homework?
Yeah, I hope everyone's been working on the homework, because that's truly the benefit in this type of learning actually comes through the application. And this is an important class for that. So I think I have a seat. So I love to start with a quote which is relevant to each of the classes. This comes from Lao Tzu from the Tao Te Ching. Knowing others, one is learned. Knowing thyself, one is enlightened. Conquering others requires force. Conquering oneself requires strength. Knowing contentment, one is rich. Having perseverance, one is firm. Abiding in the center, one endures. Even in dying, one enjoys eternal life.
That's nice.
That's a nice one.
Yeah.
I love those Taoists.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, you know, Susie,
They're
Zane
Eastern
said,
Hermeticists.
well, that's what he, and Zane says that, and he said we have the most in common with
The
Taoists.
Taoists, yeah. Truly. I never tire of the Tao Te Ching. All right. I wanted to start tonight's class with a little mythology, because this is a story that is related to what this class has been about. We've been talking about success. In the first 2 or 3 classes, we talked about, wealth and career and wealth building. And there's a story that comes to us from the Greco-Roman mythology about a king of ancient Greece, actually in the region of Asia Minor, by the name of Midas. And what happened is, in gratitude for the safe return of the satyr, Silenus, the god Bacchus offered to grant King Midas any wish. This is a story that, profoundly struck me as a child when we used to read it, Aesop's fables. And we all know what Midas chose. Greedily, he wished that all he touched would be turned to gold. He quickly realized that he could enjoy no feast nor the tender caress of any of his loved ones. And before succumbing to starvation, he was relieved of his detested gift by washing in the river Pactolus. So, And the moral of the story is?
When you're washed in love, you can get over your hunger for gold.
I suppose that's a good one. But basically, be careful what you wish for. Again, a lot of the emphasis on this class has been about success, which we oftentimes is equivalent to us as wealth building, or in the case of Midas, having this, this gold in his treasury. And basically what happens in this world is that we have expectations that somehow power, money, health, and attractiveness is going to make us happy. The question is, how many of us will end up as skinny millionaires loved and admired by all?
I gave that up a long time ago.
First step towards mental health.
Happiness.
So, basically, living a joyful life isn't one size fits all. This becomes, the process is an individual creation, which is what we're talking about tonight. And what's important to continually ask, and we tried to approach this in the homework from some of the earlier classes, in the self-inventories and the listings, which I gave to you. And it's important to sit daily and think about what are the activities that you're engaged in that makes you feel either happiest or what I like to call most alive. Here's a wonderful quote, and a long one, from a Holocaust survivor, Viktor Frankl. Don't aim at success. The more you aim at it and make it a target, the more you are going to miss it. For success, like happiness, cannot be pursued. It must ensue. And it only does so as the unintended side effect of one's personal dedication to a cause greater than oneself, or as the byproduct of one's surrender to a person other than oneself. Happiness must happen, and the same holds for success. You have to let it happen by not caring about it. I want you to listen to what your conscience commands you to do, and to go on and carry it out to the best of your knowledge. Then you will live to see that in the long run I say, success will follow you precisely because you had forgotten to think about it. His specialty in psychiatry was really looking into those experiences of persons that went through horrible tragedies and how they kept on going through life. How do you function afterwards? So, we've been talking about wealth, and certainly I'm of the opinion that, besides health, one's greatest wealth is their happiness. And happiness is not so much determined by the things or the events of our lives, but it's actually determined by the way in which we interpret the events of our lives. This is very important to remember. The quality of our lives is in proportion to our ability to control our inner experience. Our best moments come when we are voluntarily engaged in something that is challenging and worthwhile. Now, this takes us back to the very first class where we discussed the cycle of necessity. And basically, what is the soul doing? It's descending into matter for what? Experience. That's all we do here. And we hope that that experience allows us to grow in love and wisdom, compassion and understanding.
Is that what boredom comes from?
Absolutely.
What keeps people questing for some new experience? Or...
I think questing for something is different than boredom, because oftentimes people who suffer from boredom are actually not questing.
No.
You may find, Vicki, that those who are questing are actually not bored.
Right. Well, no, that's true. I'm never bored, I can tell you that.
Yeah, it's not a word in my vocabulary. Yeah, this was a great conversation I had with an older friend yesterday. Of, how we see ourselves as seekers and not necessarily being, all that interested in having the answers, but being very interested in always, asking the questions and, looking. So, basically, success, which is what this class is about, is feeling good about your life and not focusing on what is missing from your wish list. Whenever you're thinking about what you have, you will generally experience some contentment. Unless what you have is a truckload of problems. But when one actually sits and does inventory, and much of why the homework in this class has been about personal inventory, is when we do that, we actually reach a state of contentment. Whenever we're thinking about what we don't have, observe your feelings when you're thinking about something you don't have. It's oftentimes accompanied by something that is disturbing to you. So, this is our moment-by-moment occupation. And the way we achieve it, as I said earlier, it's in proportion to our ability to control our inner experience. So basically, our happiness is dependent upon the degree to which we are able to develop control over what enters our consciousness. Therefore, we forfeit our happiness whenever we choose to fixate on our goals and forget about the present moment. When we're doing that, now I'm not saying it's not important to have goals, but it is important to not fixate on them, because you impede the process of flow. The other thing that we discussed in the first class is that life is a schooling, and oftentimes where we learn is actually through our most difficult lessons. I mean, if I just think back to maybe 10 years ago when I was attending the university, of all the classes I took, the class that was the hardest for me was geology. Because it was outside of everything I had studied prior. Not that I didn't have an interest in earth sciences, but the different layers of the cake from Precambrian to Cretaceous and the order in Pennsylvania and the order in which all of that fell was really something to be mastered. But I will tell you that although it was the most difficult class for me, it was the most enjoyable class that I took. So what we have to do is basically learn to enjoy life despite the adversities, and again, always be pushing ourselves towards finding creative solutions. So, this is going to be as unique as each of you are, because there is, just as, there's no one-size-fits-all, there is not one recipe that's going to work for each individual. Now, in order to understand our uniqueness, however, the birth chart is the key. And the way to move towards your happiness is ultimately by learning to evaluate your own birth chart. We're basically working with a set of symbols that can be very profound and very revealing and symbolic of energies, events, and experiences that come in our life. And oftentimes we can go to others and receive insight, support from the outside. But it is, very much an internal job in the sense that we also have to draw our own conclusion about how each of these symbols works for us. There is a process which we use to start to control our consciousness, which, as we've already discussed earlier on in this evening, is that our happiness, which is our true wealth, our success, is ultimately dependent on gaining greater and greater degrees of control. Life is about gaining ability. And that process is called alchemy. And in alchemy, we basically work to transform, or what we call transmute, the astrological energies that are areas of discomfort for us into happier and more pleasurable expression. There are two ways by which we do that. One is called conversion, the other is antidotes, and we're going to talk about this process as we move along in tonight's class. But I wanted to go to a diagram after a quote from Buddha, which I love, which is, "Wherever I go, there I am."
That is such an amazing artist.
Beautiful. Whose is that?
I didn't write down whose work that is. Do you know the...
You know what? I saw it in Mexico when I was there, and I don't know the artist, but he does the most beautiful work. I just love it. Does all kinds of pictures like that.
So basically, the thing about our astrological chart is we take ourselves with us wherever we go. And unless we start to transmute or change the energies that are within that chart, which manifest as trends of thinking, feeling, and action, we basically get to, reproduce the same experiences over and over again, of course, determined by the degree to which the new environment allows expression and allows opportunity. So this is very hard to see even on your handouts, but what I've done is a breakdown to the side. In Course 18 of the Brotherhood of Light lessons, which is called Imponderable Forces, and I must say I've always loved the name of it, because I still spend time pondering them. But C.C. saying, based on his lifetime up to that point of studying all facets of the occult metaphysical world, decided that if you were going to break down your time and how you should spend it in becoming familiar with unseen energies, imponderable forces, and how they impact us, he determined that 1/2 of that pie is best spent on learning to develop an understanding and control over one's own thoughts. And that 1/4 of your time is best spent doing what we're doing here in class, and that is becoming familiar with astrological influences, how they form a language of consciousness, and how they impact us, both through natal energies, through the progressed energies, through mundane astrology and world events. That 1/4 of your studies is best placed there. Environmental influences, he gave 1/8 of this piece of pie.
I'm a bit confused. Are you talking about amount of time in your studies?
Yes.
Okay.
Let's say, in your day, if you had 2 hours
Okay.
to devote towards personal development and study, well, put 1 hour of that time towards figuring out how your own mental processes function and how to gain some control over them. Which is pretty much everything that we looked at in the process of happiness. Because happiness is determined not by the events of our lives, but the way in which we interpret them. I mean, talk to 2 people who have gone to the same movie. How different is that? Or 2 people who went to the same party, or went to the same family dinner. We're all going to have a different story about it. Even though the event was the same, we will all tell a different story.
3 siblings in the same household have different stories.
Oh yeah, as to how they grew up, who was the favorite. So, environmental influences have, this can have to do with a lot of things. Environmental influences are everything from what we discussed 2 weeks ago when we had all that extra time, gemstones, colors, choosing certain parts of the country, type of environments in which to place oneself, but musical tones. These are all environmental influences. So understanding them is really worth about 1/8 of our time. He assigned 1/16 of that time to go to the thoughts of others. I don't remember what the comment was, but there was a point in our office today where Vicki and I said the same thing at the same time. You may have all had the experience, if you've ever spent a lot of time around someone, or been in some form of relationship, be it brother-sister, sibling relationship, parent-child, friendship, romantic relationships. I mean, some of you may have had the experience of thinking about someone and having the phone ring, or it might ring the next day or 2 days later. And this is somebody that you may not think about with great frequency, but somebody you haven't heard from in 8 years happens to me quite often. I'll think about them within 2 days, the phone will ring.
You're talking about thoughts that we have of others, or the effect of their thoughts
The
on
effects
us?
of the other people's thoughts on
Okay.
others.
I'm just,
No, you go ahead.
I was going to say, I'm suspecting that no matter what we think about other people is influencing them, whether they link it to us or not. I'm actually starting to see a lot of the fruit of that.
Right, whether they link it or not. And again, these divisions, these are averages that he came up with. We're going to find that everyone has different degrees to which this functions. Now, I know some people who are very open to the thoughts of others. And there are telepathic things going on all the time, but there's also a process. I'm sure almost everyone has either at some point been in a discordant relationship or has observed someone who has been. Would that be truthful for everyone?
Yeah.
Well, one thing you may notice is when you're in a discordant relationship with someone, you're basically feeding poison back and forth to one another's souls, to one another's consciousness. You know, when you're upset with someone and you're just, you know, thinking about the conversation over and over again and the things you would have said or the things you'd like to say, and all of that is bombarding the other person. And then you run into them in the supermarket, and what happens to you?
You get that energy back.
You feel like you've been socked in the solar plexus. You run into them by accident, and boom, you recollect your energy. Does that ever happen to anyone?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So there is this link between all living things. And within humans, there becomes soul links between certain persons. And so that process works, which is that boom, collect your energy. And there's also the other process where people can do absent treatments and healings on others by, at a distance, thinking about that person and sending them influences to the positive and to what's for the highest good in their well-being. Healings actually happen that way. Now, of course, again, these are averages. If somebody belonged to the spiritualist church, they would feel that spending only 1/32 of one's spiritual development on unseen entities was not sufficient enough. They might feel that that should actually take up this piece of the pie. And again, there are different temperaments and different mentalities out there. But there are also, whether it's, dearly departed family members that have moved on, things that may be considered more angelic forces or demonic forces that are out there floating around and attaching themselves to certain temperaments and personalities. But again, give it 1/32 of the amount of time that you're going to spend. This should not necessarily be your major focus. But understand that world and how it works, and be able to recognize when there is a non-physical or non-human contact that is influencing. There are some people who are so receptive that they are haunted or hounded or possessed or obsessed by unseen influences.
I think I would personally distinguish between how much time I would spend on learning about those things, on an average, But then if I'm a type of person, which I have been from time to time, where I've had a lot of things attaching to me and having to try to figure out what the heck they are and get help, that sometimes in varying periods of my life has taken a lot of my time up. And I guess in a way I've had to study it a little bit at that time to understand what I might be doing to contribute to the situation. But
right, and that takes us back to this.
Yeah, right. The thoughts.
Because ultimately, the more time one spends in controlling their own states of feeling and thinking, the less influence that can be had from outside sources. And then imponderable forces really is everything else. You know what's as bad as entities? Advertising.
It's an imponderable force.
That is an imponderable force. How is it that it affects us?
It's very...
And there was certainly a period back in the 70s where they were starting to shoot subliminal messages in films and things happening at, drink Pepsi or whatever the beverage, drink your favorite beverage, and or you're getting thirsty now, to see if it would influence, candy counter sales. And yeah, it does. And you drive up I-25, you're bombarded by billboards on either side of the road, all around town, television.
I wouldn't be surprised. I'm curious about what's going to be happening with all these reality shows people are experiencing. It's really changing a lot of dynamics. Like, people are being exposed to a lot of traumas secondarily just by watching a lot of these and being influenced by them. So I'm curious to see where it's going to head.
Yeah, it's going to have an impact on us. And again, this whole thing of going back to happiness and determining what it is we want in life. We don't want either entities telling us what we want and impacting our desires, nor do we want, marketers to be making those choices or decisions for ourselves as well. So we have to learn really how to filter things out. Otherwise, if you spend a lot of time listening to the radio, reading periodicals, newspapers, magazines, looking at the billboards around you, you're being constantly informed that you actually will not be happy until you have what?
Something you don't have.
Right. And ultimately, keep in mind, each one of you can only eat one meal at a time, and you can actually only drive one car at a time. So there certainly are limits as to what we really need, but advertising is geared towards making us insatiable. The Indian tribes of the Amazon call the outside culture the termite people because they're just devouring up resources all the time, insatiably.
What suggestions are there to strengthen your spirit or yourself against this stuff? Like aura reinforcement, or what steps can someone take if you feel like you're easily affected by billboards or just someone else's energy?
What I always ask is the question, who says so? If I'm feeling or experiencing something, I ask myself the question, well, on whose authority? Who says so? And that's a good place to start. But through the remainder of this class, we'll sort of address all of that to some degree or another. So, on to the topic of this class, which is how to rule the stars. Zane said, we do not prevent the various forces of nature, whether they be ocean currents, flowing streams, glaciating ice, or the ionizing cosmic ray from acting. But through our knowledge, we are learning to adapt ourselves rather successfully to these and other environmental forces. Nor can we prevent the planets from radiating the energies they most certainly do. But we can learn what those energies are and how they influence human life, and then take proper steps to utilize them so that they will work not against us, but in a direction that will be to our advantage. This is from Esoteric Psychology.
So it's like sovereignty. It's really claiming our sovereignty.
Exactly. And that comes through what is so important in Hermeticism is the development of the will. So basically, willpower is learning conscious control, which is learning to control one's impulses and actions. It's a form of self-control. Think of it as conscious volition. And throughout the Brotherhood of Light lessons and the teachings before them that they were extracted from, the whole emphasis is on the development of the will. You will see this in traditions other than ours. If you look at Ignatian spiritual exercises out of the Jesuit tradition, or if you study any of the martial arts out of China, Japan, Korea, and or if you study yoga, they are all processes or rituals that are developed around the same ultimate goal, which is the development of the will, and learning how to control one's consciousness. Hermeticism combines the Eastern emphasis on consciousness with the Western emphasis on the will in order to find transcendence. Our goal is always constructive action, And one of the best uses of our will, appropriately tied in tonight's class, is how to transmute planetary discords into a more harmonious expression. Zane said in Occultism Applied, throughout nature we find one principle manifesting itself under two modes of motion, construction and destruction. Practically every emotional state, every thought, and every action lend their energies as adding to or detracting from our success in life. After all, life is not just a few important decisions and actions. It is the sum of countless moods, perceptions, conceptions, and movements, only a few of which are noteworthy, but all of which contribute their little or their much to the sum total of attainment. When I find drama entering my life, or getting, worked into a froth over something, one of the things I try to do is stop and ask myself the question, in the eternal scheme of things, how important is this? And that actually helps me to put a lot of the pieces of my life into really accurate perspective. Here we have a picture of power lines. What do power lines do?
Transmute energy.
They direct energy. Yeah. So that's why I chose this picture as a symbol, basically, because to make the most of life through the application of esoteric principles, we must develop the habit system of directing all of our energies constructively. Every minute of our lives, we are contributing to or detracting from ultimate success. A neutral ground is difficult to discover. At all times, to a greater or less degree, our energies are flowing in channels that are destructive or channels that are constructive. Only when the sum total of constructive energies is in far excess of the sum total of destructive energies is there satisfactory accomplishment.
And then you come into the issue of the great amount of us that is unconscious. To learn how to recognize the actings of that in our world is quite a big task because we're not necessarily conscious of it.
No, though we do have one very good gauge. And that is our physical organism. So one of the things I constantly try to be aware of is how is this making me feel?
Yeah.
Because we do, we are finely tuned instruments, and you can just stop in the middle of the day and know, is it collecting in my lower back, or is it my left shoulder, or am I getting a pre-migraine, or am I feeling, sick to my stomach, or is my heart dilating and feeling warm and, open, and am I breathing more deeply and feeling oxygenated? There are these measurements that we can constantly sort of take our own pulse throughout the day, and there's information to be gained from that. It doesn't tell us everything, but Samara, I think it's because the physical body does respond to the stuff going on in the subconscious.
It does, yeah.
It's one of the ways where we can have some contact with that and have an awareness of, it's, all right, is this feeling constructive or destructive?
And I think things like synchronicities and dreams, and because I work a lot also with images and things that come out, if you do images, what comes out in that might bring up to conscious awareness things.
Yeah, very much so.
So there is a lot, but it's like easy to not remember that there are a lot of ways, and like you just said, the body is really the closest one to us, So that's a really good
Statement.
reminder.
Well, yeah, don't you think also that the type of experience, or at least for me, what I've learned is that if I'm attracting certain experiences, that's telling me something about how I'm managing the energy that's coming my way.
Right, and going back to the first class, it's also telling you something about what your soul is being driven for.
Yeah.
Because if we're having repeated experiences, what I call themes, thematic experiences throughout our lives, which are generally represented by dominant planets and discordant planets in our chart, then there is something that our soul is being trained for. Because some of those things do get worked out over time, and other times you just, the bar gets lifted a little bit higher. Or if you're doing limbo, a little bit lower. But to see what contortion you can get into and how much skill you've gained dealing with that particular type of energy.
And like when I think you had asked us to look at what were painful, difficult experiences, to not necessarily, I actually feel it's important not to necessarily negate those. It's just sometimes the way, unfortunately, that we seem to learn through those. I mean, it's not what I want.
And like
I'm not an
advertising,
artist.
that's what we ask the question also, who says so?
Well, exactly, and that's a really good question to ask, because I keep saying, just let me have it in a positive way, I'll learn it.
Right, because, we are, because of the pleasure-pain training that we have, happiness for many people actually comes not just from receiving pleasure. Pleasure's the reward, but it's when we actually cultivate pleasure in dealing with difficult circumstances and coming out the other end. This is your brain. This is your soul. You've seen this before. And basically, the astrological chart is mapping the inner plane activity, and events are attracted to us on the outer plane, first from this inner plane activity, which is either our stellar makeup and or our dominant trends of thinking and feeling. And that's what draws in the outer experiences. Democritus, who said, just as tragedy and comedy can be written using the same letters, so many varied events in this world can be realized by the same atoms, as long as they take up different positions and describe different movements. He's writing 2,500 years ago. So, this tragedy and comedy is basically dealing with the concept of like attracts like. What goes on in our thinking and feeling determines the texture and color and mood of the events. So we're either attracting in experiences of loneliness or companionship, poverty, of plenty, of ailment or health. And the astrological chart is actually our key in this, primarily because what's going on is opposite desires and or unfulfilled desires create stresses in the astral body. And what happens? They're giving us feelings of discontent. Many of you may not remember when you were children. I have a pretty good memory that goes back a long ways. And I can remember many times when I was thwarted in my efforts. And many of you have raised children. And if you think of them as small children, especially 2- and 3-year-olds, what goes on when you restrict them from doing what they want to do?
They're going to apply into a range.
Exactly. There's a tantrum that happens. Well, guess what? This goes on internally for us. It's part of, I mean, basically they go into a rage because their desires are being restricted. And it's the same thing that's raging within us in our charts, you know, especially if we have a lot of squares or oppositions. These become opposite desires and or unfulfilled desires. So, what happens when we have too much internal conflict? It can get scary.
Yeah.
It basically, we have mental breakdowns, we have extreme discontentment, depression. What happens when you can stretch out a rubber band? When you let go of it, what happens?
It goes back close to its shape.
Goes back to its original form. And that is the nature of habit systems. We especially see this in the world of dieting. When people do extreme diets and when they can no longer take that, oftentimes they return to the previous habits. So a habit system is any customary practice or use. It's an acquired behavior pattern, regularly followed until it has become almost involuntary. Dominant or regular disposition or tendency, prevailing character or quality. From the astrological perspective, planetary aspects are indicators of habits of thinking and feeling. This is, again, an astrologer can look at your chart and give you aha moments, but the biggest aha moments come when you develop an understanding of the urges governed by each of those planets and the nature of planetary aspects when they combine. This is where the real insights start happening in your life, because you get to see the idiosyncrasies of character. What is this a picture of? Anyone know?
It's a rut.
It's a rut. Now this is the Santa Fe Trail, over which wagons rolled for years upon years upon years. Out here, when you're driving up I-40, you can see portions of this up on San Felipe Pueblo. And if you go out onto the, out around the areas around Springer and in northeastern New Mexico, you can still see portions of the trail there. Actually, what you see down here on the San Felipe Pueblo is actually the Camino Real, but the Santa Fe Trail you'll see in the northeastern corner of the state. Now, when you're driving a wagon along a trail like this, what happens? Yeah, your wheels stay within the confines because it's gone through that pattern over and over and over again. So this means that habits are really hard to break. They become involuntary. And we repeat the same behavior over and over until we actually believe that we can't function outside of that behavior. And sometimes you'll hear this. We've all had persons come to us and complain about something, and when we suggest an alternative, what do?
They'll dispute it or...
Yeah, or defend their actions.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I can't do that because... So we do kind of get comfortable in our ruts. And it's generally easier to recognize other people's ruts than our own. All right, so change in habit systems. This is a quote, author unknown. We will only change when the pain of staying the same becomes greater than the pain of changing. That's when we get out of those ruts. I like that image. Very gradual change. Come on, let me out. So we'll go through this quickly. We're looking at how to develop constructive energy. We're basically looking how to make building blocks of our consciousness. And constructive habit systems involve consciously choosing to think, feel, and act in ways that contribute to our ultimate success. And this is difficult at first, much like that rut that we saw in the previous path. You know, a few years ago, we had an incredible snow here. And how was it for you, Barbara, to get from your front door to your car the first time?
Well, I was out of town. So.
Oh, wrong woman to ask. How about you, Bea?
It was hard.
Yeah, you're from Iceland, where they know snow.
Knee deep.
The first time you go walking in snow, it's a struggle because you're knee deep. You're needing resistance from the environment. But each successive person that went out my front door and into the front door to the front sidewalk, the pathway became deeper until it was actually this channel cut through. So just as we can create ruts, when we try to get out of our ruts, there is as much resistance from the environment until, through repeated activity, we've been able to trailblaze. The other thing here is don't act helpless. This is one of the most destructive things for your spiritual growth. A lot of adult irrationality is patterns from childhood as well as patterns from our chart. And when we commit ourselves to the destructive patterns, they actually restrict the flow in our lives. So, fight being submissive, whether it's to your programming, be it genetic, astrological, or social, because it cultivates helplessness. That's why I always say resist, the billboards and the commercials. The better paper towel or cleaning product, which costs 4 times the amount of, chlorine, bleach, or ammonia, may not necessarily be better. But we're being told that it is. All right, in the process of alchemy, every detail of our thought, feelings, speech, and actions must conform to our new regimen of constructive expression. To accomplish this, we must first evaluate in detail the areas of our lives where we desire change and set about a new plan of action. The birth chart allows us to identify the thought cause of our unhappiness. And by first becoming aware of who we are, we can effort towards improving our future. So, don't act helpless. Find a solution.
Just a question on that thought cause. Is he talking about that literally and metaphorically? Like, is he talking about thought cause as being just on the person's thinking, or is he talking about it in a much wider way, like an energy that might be
The planets represent energies which manifest as thoughts and feelings. That's one of their manifestations.
Right.
So to live the constructive life, we must cultivate the attitude that there is no challenge in life for which we cannot find a solution. So the process of alchemy is called transmutation. What would that word imply? It certainly comes to us from the Latin. It means to change into another nature, substance, form, or condition. So in alchemy, what we are doing is we are transmuting the inner makeup of our soul into new substance. The goal, and this isn't quite the same gold as the Midas touch that we used as our metaphor earlier, but the symbol of gold was the highest, most precious metal, the gold standard, that which is pure, and the ancient alchemist sought to create gold. So think of this as creating spiritual harmony, building up a spiritual body. The way we transmute energies, there are two ways. They are either conversion or antidotes. We'll talk first about conversion. What does it mean to convert? To change from one form into another. It's much like transmutation. You're working with the same energy. Conversio means a complete change. So what we're doing in alchemy is we are working with the particular metal, and the metals are symbols for planetary energies. Again, we're working with a symbolic language. And the process of alchemy, when we use conversion, is reconditioning the energy that is found into the chart. And what we do is we stimulate only feelings that will express constructively or harmoniously around that energy. This is very hard work to do. Hardest work you'll ever do, but it's probably the most worthwhile work you'll ever do. That way, you're not just habitually reacting based on the patterns in the chart, but actually taking an effort to gain some degree of control over consciousness and directing it down lines of expression of your choosing. We'll give examples as we move along, especially when we go into the alchemical meditations. Now, antidotes are another process we use. When it is too hard to convert something, because if you think of it, sometimes when you dial into a particular energy that you have, sometimes it's going to feel like putting salt on a wound. Let's say you have a highly discordant Mars, and you're going through the world in a huff and a flare and a fighting all the time. And you try to go in and stimulate Mars and only make it express constructively. What sometimes happens is you're just continuing to hit those triggers. And that's when we go to an antidote, which is basically, it is something that we give as a remedy against. And it's in both Greek and Latin, it means the same, both antidotum and antidotum. I mean, if you think about it, you get a snake bite, you go for the antidote. You get poison, you're looking for the dissimilar substance. You're not going to go for more poison to make you better in that case.
If you look at the homeopathic principle, though, it would
Conversion.
but then that has to be very carefully measured.
In very minute almost,
doses.
Atomic doses.
That's right. So it's something we're not all skilled to do.
No. But we certainly want to try our hand at it.
Yes.
Since we don't want to be helpless.
Yes.
So, an antidote is something that prevents or counteracts injurious or unwanted effects. And in alchemy, antidotes are metals, be it gold, silver, mercury, copper, iron, tin, and lead. And they represent planetary energies. But what we're doing is we're applying disparate but compatible elements to the areas of discord in order to harmonize them. So, the antidotes, Saturn is lead, a very heavy, dull, morose, toxic metal. The antidote to lead is copper, which is bright and warm and beautiful and corresponds to Venus, which is mirthful and social and loving. Jupiter governs the metal tin, which is bright, resistant to acids, very shiny. And it is the natural antidote to Mercury, the metal of the same name, which is also highly toxic in certain forms, which is every form, be it gaseous, liquid, or solid. Iron, which is Mars, tools as well as weapons, is the antidote to silver, the moon. And there is no antidote for gold. Gold can only be converted. So, here again, lead and copper, tin and quicksilver or mercury, iron and silver, and gold are the 7 metals that we use in alchemy. The upper octave planets, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, we consider to be higher expressions of one of these metals. Uranus corresponding to Mercury, basically intellect on steroids.
Sounds like me.
Neptune is the upper expression of Venus. You know, that's love on psychotropic drugs.
Those are good, Christopher. I like that.
Yeah, I don't know what to do with the next. And Pluto's the upper octave of the moon, which the moon represents home and family relationships. Pluto becomes community, the larger family.
In some schools of thinking, people will say silver is, the moon is like not an antidote, but a complement to gold. So does it have any relationship to gold in
Yes,
kind of
you
way?
need silver to make gold. In
Okay.
alchemy, you need each of the metals in proper proportion to create alchemical gold. So again, as our soul comes down to earth and undergoes all of these experiences in order to gain ability to grow in love and wisdom and to move towards developing the spiritual body and making our way back to Godhead in the Hermetic, creation myth, we believe that in building up your soul, you have to have a little bit of each of these experiences to be a whole person.
Right. So can you use, I've got the idea that I could use Jupiter to assist me with the gold, the transmutation of the gold.
You can,
Right.
but we're going to just try and stay on track with
Just in
some
terms
of
of the basic, that would be the normal kind of
right.
thing, but you can use sometimes other.
They all contribute towards creating gold.
Okay.
Christopher, I was a little confused. Copper is the antidote to lead, or is lead the antidote to copper, or is it just...
They are mutual antidotes.
Mutual.
Silver is
Okay.
the antidote to Mars, or iron. Iron is the antidote to silver. So they're mutual antidotes. And again, tin and mercury are mutual antidotes. So let's talk about this quickly, because we need to be able to identify the urges. The sun in our chart is alchemical gold. And if you remember, it has to do with the power urges of the soul. So this is going to be those experiences in life that add to or detract from our sense of self-esteem, self-worth, authority, where we have power and control and confidence and self-assurance. Whether or not we attract honor or dishonor, recognition or lack of recognition, these are all the expressions of gold. And as you can imagine, the type of expression we get, which is contributing to or detracting from our happiness, is due generally to whether or not it's harmonious or discordant in the chart. In part. The other part is remember what we said earlier? It's not the event of your lives, but how you interpret them. We can spend a whole lot of time interpreting events of our lives and be able to add conditioning energy to any of these experiences. So I've seen individuals take very harmonious planets and make them discordant. By the same token, as we can alchemize areas of our chart that are creating disturbances for us in consciousness.
Would you say then that goal urges are, because of their significance, related significance, that that's about fulfillment? That gold would be about fulfillment, feelings of fulfillment?
Or the feelings where one feels important and in control. The sun, if you look at just the symbol, Samara,
Yeah,
it's the ego.
yeah.
It's the spark of deity within the circle of the soul. So that's that animating life force in each of us. And what is it about life? It doesn't want to die, and it wants to feel somehow significant. And those are the hardest things to stamp out in any life form. Life so much does not want to die that it spends all of its time in primarily two functions. Either reproduction, in the sense of trying to pass on its DNA to future generations, and or in nutrition, feeding itself so that it doesn't die out.
Right.
Now, every metal has what we call dross. Anyone can give me a description of dross? If any of you worked in jewelry or metallurgy? When I was a teenager, I used to work in jewelry. And when we would heat up silver for casting, there were impurities that would float to the surface of the silver, and you would have to slake it off. And that is the dross. The dross is the impurity in the metal. So in gold, the impurity is when we act arrogant, vain, self-important, domineering, officious, bossy, authoritarian, tyrannical, despotic, dictatorial, when we have a superiority complex. Are any of you liking this person thus far? What do we do when we're around people like this?
I avoid them.
We either want to go, we excuse ourselves from the room, or we grow to hate them. So, and guess what? We all have a little bit of this in us. You know, all of us have some degree of the dross of gold that we get to work with. It's more easy to recognize in others than in ourselves.
And there's the thing, because there's often a projection of what's not wanted in oneself that gets magnified out onto someone else. So it's a little complex.
It is
sometimes.
complex, but
Yeah.
on the surface, we'll work with these sort of key ideas. So what we're doing when we're trying to transmute gold, in this case, through the process of conversion, because there is no antidote, we have to change these, and we can only do so by allowing their constructive expressions. So what I've done is I've taken the alchemical meditations that I've written in the past 3 years of the quarterly and provided them for you here. I really believe that one of the best ways to reprogram or recondition ourselves is through daily meditation, prayer, affirmation. So basically these alchemical meditations are elongated affirmations. And if you have a discordant sun in your chart, I recommend daily, for at least 3 months, working with the following. Which is basically put your name in there so that it becomes first person and personal, am a radiant, vital, and creative being. I perceive the life force of the Creator as moving in and through me like gold dust suspended in the air, vitalizing all my cells and organs. I recognize that my physical form falls somewhere in size between an atom and a galaxy, and that in the eternal scheme of things, I am neither more important nor less important than either of these expressions of life. I acknowledge that I am a unique expression of the Creator, worthy of respect. I also acknowledge that all the life forms are unique expressions of the Creator and deserving of my respect. I, put your name in there, am a thoughtful, well-mannered, and courteous person who easily perceives the needs of others. I naturally gain the admiration of others by conducting myself with confidence and self-assurance. I derive great satisfaction on a daily level from always knowing that I have done my best in all of my undertakings. I am comfortable in knowing that my achievement of honors and recognition in no way detracts from the accomplishments of others. I am at ease in sharing the spotlight with other facets of God's creation. It is easy for me, put your name in there, to convert experiences of conceit and arrogance into positive expressions of modesty and humility. I am happy to be alive, and I am happy to be me. I allow the positive flow of the creative life force to move through me, energizing all whom I come in contact with. So shall it be.
It's really nice.
If that's your issue, work with this one. Now, the alchemical silver. This is the urges of the moon, which are domestic. They have to do with nesting and nurturing and family and the caring of other life forms. And the ores of silver seek to express through those qualities. However, here is a memory from my childhood. Whenever we were expecting company, my sister and I were assigned a particular task. Anyone know what that was? I bet Vicky does.
I don't know, polishing myself.
Exactly.
That's always a good one.
Yeah. Give it to the kids. You know, the company's coming. You're going to spend Saturday polishing the silver. Why? It gets corrupted so easily. Silver turns what color when it's corrupted? Black. Yeah. I mean, just think of greenish black if there's a high copper content. But if it's pure silver or sterling, you know, 999, it's going to turn black. And that is the nature of our emotions. You know, there's little that can be polluted as quickly as that. There's also, if you think about it, there's little that is as healing as silver. I mean, colloidal silver, when I was a child, silver nitrite was put in the eyes of babies, you know, as they were being birthed in order to prevent sexually transmitted diseases. Silver is antiseptic. So the pure ores of silver are actually, you know, life-sustaining and are health-inducing. But if the moon is strong in you, then there is a tendency for you to be very sensitive, caring, intuitive, impressionable, emotional, and parenting, as well as moody. And what's the thing about moods?
They change.
They change, they fluctuate, and they can take on any coloring. You know, they can be the black silver oxide that you've got to rub off to find the beauty of the instrument again. Or it could be that colloidal silver that's, you know, healing you somehow.
It can also be a bit unpredictable. You don't always know that they're gonna, that you slid into
You know, they turn on a dime.
Yeah.
So there is some dross of silver. This is what I spent my childhood
Is that from your photo album?
This is what you get when you have a dominant, discordant moon. You get to spend your life polishing silver. So the negative ores of silver, the dross of silver, is when we are moody, passive. Oh, I'll just sit here in the dark. Don't worry about me. when we're negative, fickle, gossipy, submissive, temperamental. When you're being passive, what is the antidote?
Get up and do that.
Yeah, get off your ass and do something. So Mars is the natural antidote to the moon. So what you're going to see in the following affirmation, in the solar affirmation or the alchemical meditation on gold, all we could do was convert the qualities of the sun into something positive. All of the other affirmations have a combination of antidotes and conversion, because you never know which method you're going to respond best to.
Do you relate it also? Do you take into consideration how that element is in your chart? Like, if you've got a negative moon and then you've got a badly placed and sort of negative Mars.
Yes, you do.
How do you deal with that?
You may have to go with conversion and not an antidote.
Oh, okay.
Or you may have to realize that in the process of, making that change, that there's going to be some discomfort that happens immediately, that you may break out in boils
Or you might need to start to work with the other one as well at the same time in some way, like work with an antidote for the other one and a conversion for this one.
And these are the more complicated forms, but we're going to start tonight just using the simplest form before addressing the really complicated issues. So let's say your chart is simple. Then what you want to do is apply an antidote.
Everyone loves it.
And the one for the moon is, I am a loving, compassionate, and nurturing being. I allow the healing green rays of the divine to move in and through me, filling my environment. I am sensitively attuned to the subtle life force that permeates all things, be they plants, animals, or people. All living things grow and thrive in my presence. I am intuitively drawn to those foods that nourish and sustain my physical form. I am encouraging and protective of all whom I come in contact with. Every day, I discover new and put in your own adjective, since I left one out. New and constructive ways to take care of myself so that I can better take care of others.
It's nice.
Yeah. Then you go on, I am vigilant to the moods, feelings, and thoughts that may pass through my being, and I am quick to replace any feelings of despondency, despair, or helplessness with the energetic thoughts and feelings that I can meet and overcome any obstacles that might present themselves. At times, when passivity or timidity may threaten to engulf me, I resolve to take constructive action for my protection or that of others. When others try to ensnare me with gossip, it is easy for me to redirect the conversation by saying only positive things about other people. I acknowledge that just as I have reached this stage in my development through the guidance, nurturance, and protection of others, that it is my privilege to guide, protect, and nurture others who have been placed by the Creator in my care. So shall it be. So you can see that there's admixtures going on here of conversion and antidotes in these meditations. All right, Mercury is the metal of the same name, though sometimes we call it quicksilver. Now, mercury was used to coat the backs of mirrors. It was used as medicine in ancient times till they realized that they were, poisoning people. I'm sure you've heard, as mad as a hatter. Mercury was used in the fulling process of felt. And the steaming of those hats, the mercury would be released and it'd start to create lesions in the brain. And, same thing will happen if you eat too much tuna. So So, Mercury searches for intelligence through perception, analysis, and expression. However, the thing about Mercury or the mind, if you think of quicksilver, not only can it be found in solid, I mean, it can be frozen and turned into a hammer, or it's the liquid form you find in your thermometer, or when they used to make thermometers that way, or it can be in a gaseous state if it's heated up. So it can come in any form, and the mind can go from being solid and most stubborn to fluid. In the liquid state, Mercury will take on the shape of whatever container you put it in. So it's much like environmental conditioning. And you know, the gaseous state, which is the most toxic, is when the mind is inflamed into fanaticism. All right, the dross of Mercury. Have you ever said anything you've regretted? I make a daily occupation of that. I'm constantly advising myself to, make ever more vigilant the guardian at the gate. But he has to have coffee breaks, and lunch breaks, and nap breaks. So, and I think he sleeps while I'm awake. So, poor communication skills is one form of the dross of Mercury. Have you ever misbalanced your checkbook? Never. All right. We know who has a harmonious Mercury among us. Neuroses, anyone? Mental ruminations. Forgetfulness. These are all experiences that would be the dross of Mercury. So if you're experiencing a lot of these, then you have to get in there and start, purifying this metal, which can either be done through converting, and that is only allowing the positive expressions. But it's really hard. If you ruminate on your problems, anyone ever do that? I actually only do that at around 3 in the morning, when there is
Nothing else to do.
nothing I can do about it at that time. So that's when you have to apply an antidote, because sometimes when you get into trying to think about your problems, what happens? You just get mired in quicksand. It's the snake biting its tail. So that's when you have to apply the antidote, and the antidote is Jupiter. And Jupiter functions how? Faith in a deific force that is by nature good, and that it functions through optimism, that good things will happen and that things will work out. How do you feel when you think that way?
Relieved.
Yeah, relieved is the word I would use too. So, we have to antidote Mercury with tin, which is basically having this bright, shiny bauble that makes us feel good. So in this case, the alchemical meditation is, I, put your name in, am an intelligent, insightful, and perceptive being. I use the powers of my mind to understand other people and the world in which I live. I love the acquisition of knowledge and embrace every opportunity to learn something new. Every day I create time for meditation and contemplation, in which I lift my finite mind up to unite with infinite mind, and thereby partake of God's great wisdom and insight. I am now free of any worry or anxiety, as I know that there is a benevolent, creative intelligence behind all manifestation that desires only that which is for my highest good. I, put your name in, am attentive to any habit system that I might have of focusing on the negative. and I am quick to replace any judgmental or critical thoughts with a positive, optimistic attitude. I am no longer a fault finder. I am a praise finder. At those times when pettiness or small-mindedness threatens to disturb my mental poise, I quickly switch to expansive and broad-minded thinking. It is easy for me to continually think good thoughts about myself and others. I accept that just as I have arrived at this juncture in my personal growth through the advice, instruction, and counsel of others, that it is my duty to teach and share my knowledge with those who enter my life requesting my assistance. So shall it be. Copper. The ores of copper seek love and affection through companionship and friendship. That should be inclined. Inclines. Yeah, I think the S is right next to the D key. What is it, ASDF? Yeah. Okay, inclined towards beauty, sensuality, and a love of luxury. Their tendency is towards refinement and aesthetics in all that they do. Now, copper is one of the metals that is so quick to verdigris, to oxidize. And the oxidations of copper are highly toxic. The way we experience this in our soul, my mother used to have a song when I was a child. It seemed a little taunting at times, but you know how kids can be. And it went, nobody loves me, everybody hates me, going to the garden to eat worms, big worms, small ones, itty bitty tall ones. Yeah. That's the dross of Venus. So if you're ever feeling unloved, lack of, what's that?
Hate worms.
High in copper.
They've got a lot of earth inside them, haven't they?
They do. If you're having issues with friends where you feel a loss of their affection, or some persons have the disease to please, inability to say no to others, or if you experience addictions and or periods of over-sensuality, which is a form of addiction. The thing about that whole pleasure-pain thing that we talked about 5 weeks ago is pleasure actually becomes addictive. And although it's initially a reward, can actually really harm us. So the antidote to copper is lead, which is Saturn. And if you think about Saturn, Saturn has to do with what elements? Responsibility, discipline. I'm feeling morose already. Thinking about
It could also be groundedness, huh?
Mm-hmm.
Could be things like that, structure.
Structure, system, discipline, responsibility.
So those words have got such negative connotations. I've had to unpack them sometimes to try to get the more, all the
Aired out.
well, no, more than positive associations, because I identify or associate those words with negative experiences, and so sometimes I spend a bit of time thinking about them to associate the positives, a positive interpretation or alternate words.
We will do that shortly, because copper is the antidote for lead.
Yeah.
So, the alchemical meditation for this one is, I, insert your name, am a loving, caring, and creative being. I use all my artistic talents to create beauty in the world in which I live. Even if I do not see myself as being particularly artistic, I do have some talent through which I contribute to a more aesthetic and tasteful world. I use music, art, drama, and entertainment as a means to uplift my vibratory level. Every day, I find opportunities to be more loving, be it in my relationships with family, companions, friends, co-workers, or complete strangers. I treat others with the kindness, compassion, and patience that I would like to receive. I am attentive to any tendency I might have of taking the line of least resistance or allowing others to manipulate me. Instead, I cultivate discipline and willpower and stand firm to what I know to be true. So shall it be. Hematite. This is the ores of iron. They find expression through either building up or tearing down. That is the nature of Mars. Passionate in construction or destruction, which is why iron is used both in weapons and in forming tools. So basically, when we are converting iron, we're basically, beating swords into plowshares, is the way to think of it. Iron rusts so easily, and that is also the nature of Mars, to express either as lust or as anger. And that's what it looks like. So the dross of iron is when we experience anger, aggression, impulsiveness, violence, strife, rage, fury, resentment, antagonism, hostility, destructiveness, lust, bloodlust, and desire. The antidote to Mars is the cooling energy of the moon, the healing energy of the moon, which is developing sensitivity and caring for other life forms. So the meditation is, I am a dynamic, passionate, and courageous being. I embrace every opportunity to take action on behalf of my spiritual well-being. I discover constructive outlets for my passions and my physicality and make my life a meditation in motion. I am attentive to any habit system that I might have of becoming easily irritated, annoyed, or angry, and I am quick to replace these emotions with an attitude, should be of living a completely constructive life. I don't think the R is next to the F key, though. Can't use that excuse.
Might have been getting a bit dark at that time.
Yes, exactly. Sitting there in the dark. I always built up.
Refusing to turn the light on.
Exactly. I always build up rather than tear down. I replace destruction with construction. Every day I assert myself in the direction of that which is right and true. I am willing to stand up where I see tyranny and injustice. I exercise courage in those situations where I might otherwise want to run away. At those times when anger, strife, or harshness threatens to disturb my mental harmony, I quickly retrain myself to nurture others rather than to fight with them. Without resorting to violence, I can bring positive changes to my community. I accept the fact that constructive effort is behind all accomplishment, both here and in the hereafter, and I effort daily on the behalf of the protection of the weak and helpless. I willingly become a finely honed tool in the hands of a benevolent creator to help shape a better world. So shall it be. Oops, there it is. You have it in your notes.
So, there's a kind of relationship between Mars and the Sun in the tyrannous aspect.
You'll find overlaps. among all of these things. It's hard to, especially with English, although it is a very broad language because of all of the Greek and Latin as well as Germanic influences. We still have a lot of
Play with it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
10 is Jupiter, or the religious urges. And the nature of 10 is to find expression through reliance on a higher power, faith, benevolence. Their tendency is to function ethically, to take the moral high ground. 10 gives generously and in kind receives the goodwill of others. Optimism and seeing the silver lining to every cloud are natural expressions of 10. However, even 10 is sometimes less shiny. Actually, 10 corrodes when it's been brought to very low temperatures. And then it begins to crumble and break. So the ores of Jupiter do not survive, the ores of 10 do not survive in a cold environment. And it can express as conceit, holier-than-thou attitude, religious fanaticism, when one is overly optimistic, excessive generosity, naivety, a laissez-faire attitude, excess of any kind, or gluttony are all expressions of the dross of 10. The antidote to that is Mercury, which is being able to think logically and rationally and not just relying alone on blind belief. So, I am a generous, giving, and compassionate being. I embrace every opportunity to give to those around me. I discover that as I allow myself to be a conduit for the good of the universe, greater good and opportunities abound in my life. Every day I develop new habit systems of generosity. I exercise charity in thought, word, and deed to those who may appear to be less fortunate than me. In my worldly affairs, I make every attempt to give to others more than their money's worth. I am attentive to any habit system that I might have of becoming dogmatic or holding an attitude of spiritual superiority to others. In its stead, I consciously cultivate the habit of spiritual humility, knowing that each person needs to approach the divine in the way that he or she sees fit. At those times when sanctimonious, self-righteous, or smug behavior threatens to disturb my spiritual equilibrium, I easily redirect my thinking in an attitude of goodwill and benevolence towards all. I know that God helps those that help themselves, and I direct all my petitions and prayers so that the Creator of all things provides me with the skills, talents, and abilities to successfully cope with and overcome any difficulties that may be present upon my path. So shall it be.
So would you say Jupiter actually is, you'd align the positive Jupiter with somebody who looked at quality standards?
Very much so.
That's pretty much a direction that can go in.
And in that sense, Mercury's also involved
Yeah.
because you have to apply analysis.
Yeah.
You have to discriminate, discern, contrast, and compare, which are all Mercury activities, but towards the higher good of quality as the ultimate goal. Oops, I forgot as I read to review these, but again, they're in your notes.
Yeah.
Okay, on to the one that most of us need to alchemize, the planet Saturn, which is the ores of lead. And we talked about lead earlier as being very heavy, weighty, morose, dark in color, and toxic. The ores of lead make one responsible, systematic, and dutiful in their expression. However, the ores of lead attract prolonged periods of hardship, losses, and heavy responsibilities. They can attract illness and physical disabilities, sorrows, grief, and depression. They are easily corrupted into avenues of selfishness and greed. And there is some dross on lead. So the dross of Saturn is when we experience greed, selfishness, avarice, hoarding, fear, dread, self-centeredness, depression, melancholy, despair, lack of any kind, deficiencies, hardship, poverty, illness, infirmity, and old age are all expressions of the dross of lead. The antidote to this, however, is copper, which is creativity, mirthfulness, sociability, and being able to perceive beauty in the world. And the meditation goes, I am a competent, efficient, and systematic person. I cheerfully shoulder my responsibilities and cultivate the habit system of always tackling the most difficult task first. I happily carry out my duties of protecting and providing for those persons and other living creatures whom have been placed in my care. I am vigilant to my own habitual trends of thinking, and I readily replace thoughts of selfishness and self-centeredness with thoughts of selflessness and the desire for universal welfare. Instead of obsessing on what am I getting, I now find joy in focusing on what am I giving. I find time daily to embrace the presence of the divine through his or her various manifestations of beauty, art, and music. I discover avenues for my own creativity and become an ever-increasing conduit for the source of all life. I am alert to any impending difficulties that may be approaching in my future. Instead of becoming paralyzed by fear or depression, I use the creative powers of my mind to discover solutions and act upon them. I am confident that there is no obstacle in my path for which I cannot find a successful resolution. So shall it be. So, upper octaves, we've already talked about them. We'll do them very briefly because of our time constraints. Uranus governs the individualistic urges of the soul, and as I described it earlier, it's like Mercury on steroids. This is the mind or the intellect when it's expanded into, moving beyond time and space. And therefore, its positive traits express as originality, but its negative traits express as eccentricity. Uranus people, if it's dominant in your chart, there is a good chance you suffer from terminal uniqueness. You may feel like you don't fit in anywhere, and you don't. It is a neutral planet, which means it carries no conditioning. And where it falls in a chart, it's subject to sudden change, erratic behavior, or novelty and invention. The meditation is, I am a brilliant and creative adventurer. I use my original thinking to devise new ways to bring about positive change in my world. Even if I do not view myself as an inventor, I recognize the ways in which I do things uniquely and differently from others. Every day, I discover new ways to harness the powers of my intuition and utilize these insights as a catalyst for my personal growth. As I grow personally, the people around me grow and change as well. I am ever alert to any tendencies that I may have to be rebellious or authority oppositional. I replace these traits with a kindly respect for others and the new habit system of winning others over not by argument, but by goodwill and increased ability in articulating my ideas. I easily release my apprehension and nervous tension about the future and embrace the concept of a benevolent deific presence that brings only good into my life. So shall it be. Neptune. As I described Neptune earlier, this is the upper octave of Venus. So this is basically, love on hallucinogens. It expresses as idealism or negatively as vagueness. And it also is a neutral planet. Where Neptune falls in your chart, you're subject to illusion, fantasy thinking, imagination, and intuition. The meditation follows. I am a sensitive, intuitive, and spiritual being. Every day I reflect upon the interconnectedness of all life and revel in the majesty of God's creation. As I attune myself to the source of all inspiration, my feelings of universal brotherhood increase and grow. Every day I deepen my sensitivity to other life forms and cultivate the qualities of empathy and compassion. I am attentive to any habit system that I have of harboring unrealistic expectations of other people or situations. Instead, I consciously cultivate the tendency of seeking out the truth and allowing my expectations to conform with reality. When confronted with my disappointments in myself, others, and the circumstances of life, I make effort to accept those disappointments readily and move on with my life. When periods of vagueness and confusion threaten to disturb my inner poise, I return to the discipline of my spiritual practice and experience clarity and inner peace. So shall it be. Pluto, universal welfare. This planet is dualistic and drastic. It either expresses as cooperation with the divine plan or coercion, getting others to conform to your plan. The area of the chart where Pluto falls is subject to compulsion, conformity, obsessions, and group influences. And Pluto is the upper octave of the moon. The moon relates to family and domestic relationships. Pluto reaches out to embrace the larger family, the clan, the tribe, the community as a whole.
Can I just ask about the negative, not so much negative traits, but if you have a Pluto influence in the chart, that I think you mentioned somewhere about subtle influence. That could be a positive or negative.
Not so subtle influence.
Yeah, but subtle influence could be something seen or not seen, and it could be positive or destructive. Right. So,
and again, it's becoming alert to that, developing one's sensitivity, asking that question, how does this make me feel? So you have at least that gauge going on. Question?
Alice Marie asks, when one has many discordant planets, should the focus be on the most discordant energy first? And also, does it help to use the metals themselves, like a copper or rosal, say?
If you're using it as an antidote, if Venus was the most discordant planet, I would not say to add an environmental factor that stimulates that, but you might want to work with it as an antidote.
And Susan asks, when one has a discordant ascendant, is there an alchemical meditation for that?
that's interesting.
That is such a good question, and the unfortunate answer is no.
Not yet.
And forgive me if this is you, Susan, but I always describe, if one has an overall harmonious chart, which I'm actually convinced you don't have, so you won't suffer from this complex. But if the overall chart is harmonious and just the ascendant is discordant, I call it a marvelous person with a rotten personality. But the ascendant, of course, is the soul's grounding wire to the physical body. And one has to work with that. And the best way to do that is look to what planet rules the sign on the ascendant and then find the antidote to that planet. That's the best way to work with that, because ultimately in life, in order to enjoy life and to live long enough, to do the great work that we have to do here, we have to have decent health. Though after, once one gets past 50, you get what I call the A's and P's. I always wake up in the morning and ask how my A's and P's are that day, which are aches and pains. Yes. I don't like to give them full names, so.
Don't give power to them.
Yeah, just A's and P's. But, and back to both questions, though. I would say if you are going to start this process, it's like going to the rodeo. You might as well, wrangle the bighorn first and pick the most discordant planet in your chart and decide you're going to start antidoting that. Because for one, it is going to be a major theme in your life. You'll find a lot of the issues you have are related around the expressions of that planet. And the sooner you start tackling that, and you experiment, sometimes trying to convert the energy, other times trying to antidote, and get a sense of what the response is, the reaction and or the resistance from the environment and or the habit systems which they themselves do not want to die. And just start working with that, because that one's probably going to take you a long time. So once you get that out of the way, which is the biggest steer on the block, then all of the others, you'll have the experience of success at having worked with that all of the others become easier to tackle.
You just said something really powerful
Oh,
about the habit systems themselves not wanting to die.
oh, they don't. Nothing wants to die. Nothing wants to die. And it's the same with our habit systems. So that's why sometimes we have to convert them and just twist them slightly into a constructive expression.
Could it be also a useful thing? Like if you've got a really big bad number going on, I know for myself I probably I feel a bit discouraged, so I would probably want to try an easy one as well.
Yeah, do that too.
Something where I could see the fruit, start seeing seeds of the fruit or something.
Well, and then I take it back. If that is the case, if one does get despondent or easily discouraged, then maybe the thing to do is to find a lesser area that you can tackle first and build your way up. As I said, there's no recipe here. I mean, there is somewhat of a recipe, but one size doesn't fit all, and you've got to experiment with this and figure out what's going to work best for you. Because, we don't want to put anyone in a nice canvas coat that ties.
Yeah.
But let's move to our Pluto meditation. And hopefully I can go over by about 10 minutes. If anyone has to leave to get somewhere, feel free to do so. But again, I've jam-packed material into this class. And I just want to be able to talk a little bit after we do these meditations on how autosuggestion and affirmation works. So in antidoting and converting Pluto, I am a spiritually minded and cooperative being. I am sensitively attuned to the subtle animating force that permeates all things and which motivates me to contribute to the well-being of all life forms. It is natural and comfortable for me to lend a helping hand to those members of my community who are in need. I am constantly vigilant to the moods, feeling, and thought forms that might be part of a greater societal or group consciousness. and I make certain that I act only from my own inner convictions. At times when I feel pressure to conform, toe the party line, or maintain the status quo, I go within and find the courage and individuality to stand up for my beliefs. When others try to entangle me in their destructive behavior, I redirect their energy into purely constructive outlets for the welfare of the community. I am intuitively drawn to only those groups and individuals who are beneficial for my spiritual growth. I acknowledge that there is a web of interconnectedness that unites all of creation to the Creator, and I work enthusiastically to understand my role in God's great plan. So shall it be. So, back to the rule of don't act helpless. Instead of petitioning God to take away all your problems, pray to be given the ability to successfully meet any conditions that come your way. The process of alchemy is reconditioning our thought cells, and I'll try and move really quickly, and transforming them into harmonious ones. I like to call this replacement therapy. When you find yourself thinking a thought you're not enjoying, replace it with another thought. And by having this symbol system to work with, the symbols of the metals and the symbols of the planets, it's easier for us to choose alternative symbolism. Make it your primary daily intention to feel better. In fact, practice feeling good. In other words, fake it till you make it. Everyone smile for a moment. There is actually something that happens physiologically when we use the muscles to smile that impacts our brain. So if you can't find something to make you smile, start renting comedies or reading comic strips or finding joke books, but try and make sure you get those muscles to work, because it'll make things happen differently in your brain.
There was a guy who had that famous saying, he used to wake up every morning saying to himself, every day in every way.
I feel better. Emile Coué.
Is that good?
Yeah.
And that's a really nice little sentence stem. You can kind
Every
of
day,
change.
every way, I'm feeling better and better.
Yeah.
Or things are getting better.
Yeah,
and better.
either way, you can, yeah, it's a nice one.
Reconditioning is the method, either deliberate or unconscious, by which discordant thought cells are made harmonious. As I mentioned earlier, I've also seen this happen in reverse. The innate characteristics of the planetary thought cells cannot be changed. However, the destructive qualities of the planet can be reconditioned to express only that planet's constructive qualities. This does, however, require constant vigilance. Who was it? Thomas Jefferson that said, eternal vigilance is the price of liberty?
Wow.
Well, for personal liberty as well, as I say, saving yourself from yourself. Zane said, one of the first things to learn is an attitude of constant vigilance towards the character of all thoughts, feelings, and actions. So the way you do this is you start to listen to the thoughts you think and to the words that you speak. The process is getting the scales to tip in the other direction. If you have issues with a lot of negativity, then every time you catch yourself in a negative statement, you want to pile on 3 positive statements. And you don't want to do that kicking yourself and saying, oh, here you are being negative again. Just get a sense of humor about it, use the smile muscles, and start piling on the other side of the scales so that you create an imbalance in the opposite direction.
That creates a really nice habit.
It's a great habit.
Yeah. To just know, to like a habit of applying that dynamic.
And without getting into a struggle about it, because once you get into the struggle, you're adding discordant conditioning energy to the process. And that's why the smile is important, and just shifting.
In some of the Buddhist traditions, I know Thich Nhat Hanh's one, they talk about having a half smile in everything. So yeah, that's that whole thing. Cultivating that endorphin thing.
One of the ways in which this works with affirmation and autosuggestion is that the mind actually cannot differentiate between facts and imagined facts. I think this comes from the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali when I read them as a teenager. He gives this description. And I like to give the description because 13 years ago when I moved out here to my property where I was gardening every day in the summer, I went out at twilight one night and went to turn off the well, and I stepped on what I believed to be a snake. And do you know what happened to me? It was like the Catholic saints of old. I levitated. I literally went 3 feet straight up in the air. Where did I get these superhuman powers? My subconscious mind could not differentiate between the fact and the imagined fact. So the thing is, once we start putting these other symbols into our consciousness, basically the same thing works for us. Everyone know what that is? It's an iron girder. If I had that on the floor here, could you walk on that? Chances are you could. Or you could have when you were 20. And you won't catch me.
Every time I see that.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, it doesn't.
No, it's no big deal. I've already seen it.
Okay. Yeah.
But it's just kind of an amazing thing.
Yes.
All right, autosuggestion and affirmation. Autosuggestion means, where is it coming from? You're doing this. We're being given suggestions all the time, as we mentioned, by billboard, radio, television commercials, image is being flicked at us, etc. So affirmation is something that is affirmed. We're basically declaring something to be true, and they are directing the attention to what it is we desire to accomplish. So if you piggyback this on other activities you're already doing, especially if it's the negative affirmations, you just piggyback this onto that. You could also add it to lunch or dinner, or showering, or whatever else your habit might be. So think of them like tea bags. What we want is really strong tea, and the only way you get that is by repeatedly immersing that bag in the hot water. So you have to keep watering those seeds. They need sunlight and water and other nutrients if they're going to grow. Sorry, we're rushing at headlong speed towards the end here. Zane said, oops, where is it? It's in your notes. Here is one of the affirmations, and this applies to somebody's question from earlier, and I think it was you, Michelle. I am alert to observe the approach of thoughts, feelings, and emotions that are disagreeable, and in their stead, I entertain only pleasant thoughts, feelings, and emotions. Bye, Vega. See you Sunday.
Sorry, guys.
Thanks for coming. We're almost to the end here. Only 5 pages to go. Oh, no, I'm just going to... Okay, repetition, intensity, duration. That's how you get this stuff to work. It's like building muscles. It's in your notes. Happiness. This is important. Many people forget that we need beauty and adventure in our lives. This definitely contributes to our happiness. So, do different things. If you remember a few weeks ago, I told you to write a list of all the things you'd be doing if you didn't have to work for a living, and then to pick one a week and go do it. It's very, very good for you. Explore the environment in which you live. Get out of your rut. We'll run, this is in your notes, we'll run by adventure. And I loved this quote from Anne Frank. The best remedy for those who are afraid, lonely, or unhappy is to go outside, somewhere where they can be quiet, alone with the heavens, nature, and God. Because only then does one feel that all is as it should be, and that God wishes to see people happy amidst the simple beauty of nature.
It's really profound.
It is. Move in the direction of your happiness. As I say, don't postpone your happiness. Again from Lao Tzu, the sage accumulates nothing, but the more he does for others, the greater his existence, the more he gives to others, the greater his abundance. And we'll end the class there. Thank you all for participating these last 6 weeks. Hope you got some insights.
What about the homework?
Well, there's notes for the homework. I'll give you the homework. For 1 week, avoid the tendency of making small tasks appear to be bigger than life. Just for 1 week. And during that week, I want you to tackle the most disagreeable task first. So if there's somebody that calls you and you really don't want to talk to them, call them first before you return the other calls. Just for 1 week. And then identify the most discordant planet in your chart. Write down some of the negative habit systems that you express associated with that planet. And then set about a new plan of action to alter these habit systems. And find the corresponding alchemical meditation that we covered tonight. And do it at least once a day for a month. And also note any changes you experience.
Do you select that meditation based on your mood, or just doing this once a day thing?
For 1 month, work on your most discordant planet. As I said earlier, tackle that first. Start just changing the energies first through the meditation. Bye, Barbara. Good to see you.
Bye. Bye.
Good night, all, and all of you out there on the internet who have participated. Thank you for being a part of this class and supporting the work that we do here. So, visit the website. There'll be updates as to what the next classes will be. It may not be January before I'm teaching again, but do come back. All right. Good night, everyone.
Thank you.